And I particularly want to thank the URI chapter of the American Association of University Professors for having me here today, particularly Frank and Betsy for your leadership. You have put together a robust agenda on a subject that is both timely and significant right now to our ocean state. I am truly grateful to you. For the students here, let me say that the Senate Democrats in the Red campaign continues to force some action on the student debt crisis and your college loan costs. To the speakers and the panelists, let me say thank you. I am thrilled that Bill McKibben was able to participate electronically, and to Lee McIntyre from Harvard, Corey Dean from the New York Times, Ken Kimmel from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and Timmons Roberts from Brown. You have really done a wonderful job here today, and I'm grateful. My colleagues, Carol Hagan-McAtee and Teresa Tansey, will be here, colleagues in government, so let me thank them as well. Let me start with the fact that Rhode Island is right now on the front lines of climate change. Sea level is up 10 inches at the Newport tide gauge since the 1930s. Mean winter water temperature in Narragansett Bay is up nearly 4 degrees Fahrenheit since the 1960s, and our winter flounder fishery is virtually gone. In recent weeks, we had major news stories in the Providence Journal about our drowning seacoast marshes, our endangered historic Newport buildings, and our ocean fisheries in upheaval, all from climate change. It's here. More than 3 out of every 4 Americans understand that climate change is occurring, and that doing nothing will cause a problem for the United States. And the American people have extraordinary support for their convictions from virtually every major scientific society, virtually every major state university, including, of course, thank you, URI and GSO, which I will single out separately because of the intense effects that are being felt in our oceans. From our national laboratories, from our American military and intelligence officials, and from leading American companies, doctors, and faith leaders. URI and GSO scientists are at the forefront of studying climate change, but it will take Congress to address climate change. So why is Congress frozen? Let's step back a moment to the earliest days of our democracy and some of its first principles. Our founding fathers placed unprecedented responsibility in the hands of the people. They trusted the people, not lords, not kings, not military despots. They trusted that democracy would work if the people were well informed. James Madison famously wrote, "A popular government without popular information or the means of acquiring it is but a prologue to a farce or a tragedy, or perhaps both." So a first principle is the importance to our democracy of honest public information. The founders, after the Constitution was in place, began to express concern about a new development, growing corporate power. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the 1780s that our young nation should, and I quote him, "crush in its birth the aristocracy of our moneyed corporations, which dare already to challenge our government to a trial by strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country." Madison joined Jefferson in that concern, that the power of corporations ought to be limited. So this is the second principle from those days, that government has rivals for power, and that those rivals would like to seize the instruments of government and turn them to private advantage. From state houses to the Capitol in Washington, to the administrative agencies that regulate industry and commerce, there is a trial by strength between corporate power and democracy. Whether America will be able to act responsibly on climate change is a prize right now contested in this trial by strength. But that is why Congress is jammed. The balance in this trial by strength was shifted a lot by the Supreme Court's fateful Citizens United decision, allowing special interests to spend, or much more darkly, threaten to spend unlimited amounts of money in our elections. In our political debate, dark money dollars drown out the voices of average citizens with what has been called a tsunami of slime. And all that corporate money is not spent for nothing. As one secret corporate donor exalted, and I quote, "We can fly under the radar screen. There are no limits, no restrictions, and no disclosure." The result, of course, stinks. It is polluting our public discourse, and I think it is significantly animating our current election. Adlai Stevenson spoke about forces that, and I'll quote him here, corrupt the public mind. One way for special interests to tilt the trial by strength in their favor is to influence public information, to corrupt the public mind. In her recent book, Dark Money, Jane Merritt describes in depth the means by which fossil fuel interests have put their wealth to this use. They invest in intellectuals who come up with ideas friendly to industry. They invest in think tanks that transform these ideas into marketable policies. They funnel dark money through phony-baloney front groups, often untraceably, to propagate counterfeit science, to undermine public understanding of the issue in order to undermine action in Congress. As one environmental lawyer explains, I'll quote him, "You take corporate money and give it to a neutral-sounding think tank, which hires people with pedigrees and academic degrees who put out credible-seeming studies. But they all coincide perfectly with the economic interests of their funders." Jane Mayer describes this as the, and I quote her, "think tank as a disguised political weapon." The network of polluter-paid deceit and denial about climate change has been well documented in academia by Dr. Robert Brule at Drexel University, Dr. Riley Dunlap at Oklahoma State University, Lee's colleague Dr. Naomi Oreskes at Harvard University, Dr. Justin Farrell at Yale University, and others. Dr. Oreskes' work produced the book and movie Merchants of Doubt. Dr. Farrell's quantitative analysis revealed a complex climate denial apparatus that is, and I quote him here, overtly producing and promoting skepticism and doubt about scientific consensus on climate change, end quote. Dr. Brule has even diagrammed the complex flow of cash through what he calls the climate change counter-movement, a flow that he notes polluters persistently try to obscure. Here's how he describes it. Like a play on Broadway, the counter-movement has stars in the spotlight, often prominent contrarian scientists or conservative politicians. But behind the stars is an organizational structure of directors, scriptwriters, and producers in the form of conservative foundations. If you want to understand what's driving this movement, you have to look at what's going on behind the scenes. Dr. Dunlap has called the result a climate denial machine. The results of the industry's newfound post-Citizens United political clout and of its climate denial apparatus is that Congress does nothing, exactly as the big polluters want, exactly what the big polluters paid for. This infiltration of America's public space with this new propaganda by special interests in disguise is a democracy problem. The emergence of masquerade science to compete with actual science is a key component of the propaganda effort. It plays by different rules than you all do. It's usually talk show science as opposed to peer-reviewed science. We have a duty. Each generation of Americans is given this duty to protect our American democracy against being disabled by special interests. It's a battle as old as the Republic. These days, we cannot be the nation that knew what carbon pollution was doing to our atmosphere and oceans, but could not rouse itself to do what was required. In previous generations, Americans have risked everything to serve the higher interests of this great republic. We know great things can be done by America because they've been done by America. We must not be the generation that failed at this duty. Part of the solution is to pull back the secret control of American politics through all this dark money. But part of the solution is to recognize that a predatory, well-funded rival to real science has emerged, and to understand that real science has to find a way to call out its new dark twin, industry-funded masquerade science. Thank you all for bringing attention to this highly pertinent and important question. I'd be delighted to take a few questions. Thank you, Frank.
Question?
Sir.
Peter? We're
Senator.
It's open.
It's on. Almost every morning when I open the Providence Journal, I see a tirade about you. Senator Whitehouse, I would applaud, yes. Senator Whitehouse wants to throw all of the employees of ExxonMobil in jail. I know about your...
Scientists, too.
I'm sorry?
Scientists.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the group they describe is everybody who disagrees with me.
I was very impressed by my director, Frank Annunziato, this morning when he began his remarks by talking about academic freedom, but the responsibility to act responsibly. Would you like to comment on what the newspapers say, or would you like to comment on how your colleagues in the Senate feel about your weekly, or is it daily, speeches on climate change?
I'll do the last one first and then the first one. I think one of the things that's interesting about the Senate is that your colleagues give you credit for sincerity and effort. So by giving what is now 134 straight weekly speeches on this, into which we put a lot of work, it's not cookie cutter repetition. I've got a lot of colleagues who may disagree with me, but they also respect that I'm doing this both sincerely and with a lot of effort. It also gives me the chance to be kind of the lightning rod for them to come and talk to me and say, quietly, which they have done, keep at it. I like your climate fee. Politically, I can't get there yet, but I want it there when I can move. I've even had people say, let's keep talking about this. I appreciate what you're doing. Just for God's sake, don't let your staff tell my staff that we're having this conversation. That's the power of the pressure from the fossil fuel industry on, they've selected the Republican Party to be their political target with all of the Citizens United money and to shut it down, which is why post-Citizens United in January 2010, virtually all bipartisan activity on this stopped. And it's why having conversations with my Republican colleagues about climate change is like having conversations with prisoners about escape. They may want to do it, but you got to show them that it's safe. On your first question, if you don't have a good answer to your adversary's argument, it's convenient to invent an argument that he didn't make and then attack the red herring / straw man argument. The basis behind all of this is that under the Clinton and Bush administrations, the United States Department of Justice brought and won a civil lawsuit against the tobacco industry and some of its front groups, particularly the Tobacco Institute, so-called, because they had engaged within those corporations in a pattern of fraud that was a federal matter because it used the mails and wires of the United States in order to propagate itself. Pretty simple stuff. It's really hard for the Wall Street Journal editorial page or its yapping little sidekick, the Providence Journal editorial page, to make the case that the fossil fuel industry is not amenable to the fraud laws of the United States of America, or to make the case that the fossil fuel industry is categorically different from the tobacco industry in terms of its obligation to follow the law as the tobacco case demonstrated it to be. So if you can't win those arguments, you make a new one, and that is that I want generally categorically to put people in jail. You not only see this argument, you see a very interesting trend in the outburst along these lines, with consistent connections of repetition of argument, repetition of actor, repetition of the same piece over and over again, and almost always the mouthpiece is a mouthpiece of the fossil fuel industry. So what I view this as is defensive behavior by an organization that doesn't want to have to show up in court, even in a civil proceeding, because in a courtroom, the truth matters. You got to put your arguments in based on evidence. And there's a judge keeping score over who's lying and who's not. They're used to much more adaptive forums than that, where their lobbying prevails, where they can say whatever they please, where the fix is in. So, this is a fight that I think is worth having. When you look at what's happening in Rhode Island, I don't want to have people 50 years from now say, where the hell was Senator Whitehouse when Newport Restoration Foundation was having hearings and seminars on how $500 million worth of historic housing is at risk. And I don't want to have to answer to the fishermen who are catching grouper and tarpon in their nets, what the hell is happening to my oceans out there? So on we go. It's going to be bumpy, so strap in, but I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. I just read yesterday, last night in fact, that there was a bill passed in Washington, and you, Senator Whitehouse, had to compromise, and I myself, as a mother, I don't compromise, but as a politician, you must. And in the compromise, you reduced the hurdles that the fossil fuel industry has to overtake in order for them to sell the fracked natural gas overseas. Is that true?
In part.
In part.
This was a bipartisan energy bill that was drafted by the Energy Committee. I don't serve on the Energy Committee, but it was drafted in the Energy Committee. Senator Cantwell was the lead on our side, who's a very good green environmental advocate. Senator Murkowski from Alaska was the Republican. We got things we wanted.
Which was?
They got things they wanted. The net effect of this bill is going to be a very significant reduction in carbon emissions and support for green energy programs. We had to put into the bill some things that we did not like, because that's how compromise works. When you're the minority party, you don't get to dictate terms. So on balance, I thought that was a bill that was worth voting for, and I would vote for it again, because on balance, it's good for reducing our national carbon footprint by a fairly significant margin, too.
Carolyn
Yes,
is
sir.
back.
Oh, sorry, Frank, you doing this?
Yes. Carolyn, oh, you moved.
Senator Whitehouse, first and foremost, thank you very much for all your work here. My question is, given the situation that you outlined, how would you prescribe we, as private citizens of Rhode Island, what can we do? How do we move this issue forward as private citizens? Thank you.
My perspective on this is that we're at a very positive tipping point right now. In the world I inhabit, the lobbying presence of corporate America on this issue is marshaled entirely on the side of the fossil fuel interests. The rest of corporate America has terrific climate policies in many cases, are pushing sustainability out their supply chains in many cases, have websites and communications that are very clear about the reality and importance of dealing with climate change. But like the sign over Dante's Inferno, when they come to Congress, they practice abandon hope, all ye who enter here. There is no positive lobbying from the corporate community. One example is Coke and Pepsi, who are two terrific companies on this. They lobby through something called the American Beverage Association, which expends zero effort lobbying in favor of any climate action, and which sits on the board of the United States Chamber of Commerce and contributes money to it. And the United States Chamber of Commerce is one of the most ardent and vociferous and remorseless opponents of doing anything on climate. So here you have these two wonderful companies that are doing great things in so many of their corporate arenas, and yet as their lobbying presence is filtered through to my world, it turns negative. Their lobbying presence in Congress is arguing against the policy that they enunciate publicly on their websites through their CEOs. So that provides an opportunity to sort that out, because it's not comfortable for a big corporation that depends on young consumers to have a policy that's here and advocacy that is the opposite. So pushing on the corporate community through every organization that you own, through your communication with them on their websites, anything at all, they want to be right on this issue. The world they have lived in has been a world in which if they felt if any one of them stuck their head up, they'd be punished. And what changed from Paris was that 150 American corporations, big ones, the Bank of Americas, the Cargills, the Unilevers, the Apples, the Googles, on, all signed up saying, climate change is real, President Obama, get out there and get something big, the world needs to act, we'll have your back. If that group can stay together, if they can keep the band together and turn their attention from Paris to Washington, you can blow the fossil fuel lobbying out of the water with counter pressure. And I am here to tell you that there are at least a dozen Republican senators who are eager to see a path through the Citizens United barbed wire gunnery that has been erected to keep them captive. 5 just filed a climate resolution with me yesterday in the Senate. 5 Republicans, and it's strong. So we're on a tipping point.
Molly, can you get to Peter?
Senator, this is a follow-up question on the one that Lorraine asked. I've been following what you've been doing, and many of us have. 2 years ago, you wrote a letter to FERC asking them to expedite their study of what would happen when the AIM expansion project, that's a pipeline expansion project through Burrowville, was put in place. Many of us said at that time, and we spoke up in the docket, this gas is there for, or the project is there to export gas. FERC responded by saying, we can't speculate, we don't know that, get lost. Basically, that's what it boils down to. They didn't use those words, as you might imagine. Then they came through with the final environmental impact statement. About 6 weeks after that, you and I think 16, a total of 16 Democrats led by Al Franken wrote a letter to Secretary Moniz expressing your concern about exports and how it would hurt the environment in Rhode Island in particular. And now I read in the newspaper yesterday that you voted for something that exports that. You said there is something good in that bill. Well, I would like to know what that something good is, because adjectives are nice, but I am a scientist, I believe in numbers. So when you say good, wait a second, when you say good, how do you measure that? How in particular do you calculate the effect of methane? Do you use the number that EPA uses, which is 25 years old, 1/4 of what it really should be, or do you do a real measurement on the time scale that matters, which is 10 years, 20 years, 30 years max? So tell me, what are the goodies, but tell me in numbers, not in adjectives, please.
It was I'll have to get you the numbers, I don't have it in front of me right now, but the net carbon reduction from the bill across all fuels, carbon equivalent, was a very considerable number. If I had it now, I'd tell it to you, but I will write to you and lay out the elements of the bill and the carbon savings that we believe are trustworthy based on analysis by EPA and the environmental community.
Make sure you specify whether it's equivalent on a 20-year time scale, real time, 100-year time scale, because it's a factor of 4.
Got it. Got it.
Other questions for the senator?
Hi. My question is in regards to the upcoming election that will be here in a few days for the Democratic Party. And Senator Sanders has stood on the notion that climate change is one of the biggest threats to the world. Oh, sorry.
Close, there you go.
And what I'm wondering is how your thoughts on Secretary Clinton's views on climate and whether she has a platform that's adequate in addressing kind of fossil fuel industry influence.
I think her platform is adequate. I think it's been improving steadily through the campaign. And if she's our candidate, I hope to lean in very hard to have it improve further still. And if she's elected, I hope to lean in very hard with her transition team to improve it even further. To me, the dominant fact in this election is the question of whether we have a Democrat president or a Republican president. Both Trump and Cruz, the two likeliest ones, are flat-out climate denials. Absolutely no concession to the fact that any of this science is real or that any of these things are happening in Rhode Island or elsewhere. So, from my perspective, they would be a really dramatic setback at a time when we cannot afford a dramatic setback on this issue. Between Senator Sanders and Senator Clinton, my personal feeling is that Senator Clinton, Secretary Clinton, is better armored up and has more experience tangling with the attack machinery on the other side to survive the period between the convention and November and win that election. And I will be a relentless voice with her to be as strong as she can. I also think that she will be very effective in working with Congress to get the most out of us that can be gotten out of us. She's effective and smart and persistent, and I think we'll be willing to maybe shake a little more stick than we've seen recently from the White House to get things accomplished. And I think she does feel the urgency of this. So I'm hoping that we can give her a victory in Rhode Island. We can settle the internal party dispute. We can all pull together, and we can go ahead and make sure that the next administration is serious about climate policy.
Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. Wait, I guess. You, the philosopher.
Front and center.
I was just curious what the kind of long-term strategy for the Democratic Party is in trying to get money out of politics, campaign finance reform.
I'm the lead Democrat, which means I'm the lead senator, on a bill that would require disclosure of who's behind contributions. Anything over $10,000, no matter how many shell corporations you run it through, you got to follow it all the way back until you find the human. I hope that we're going to be able to pass that. I think that the election season, with all this grotesque advertising by groups that nobody's ever heard of, is going to continue to create this uncertainty, this unease, this discomfort among Americans that the political system that they knew is gone. I mean, they knew candidates doing ads, they knew parties doing ads, but what the heck is Americans for Puppies and Prosperity, or whatever, they kind of make up these names. And I think every time one of those ads launches, it has two payloads. Payload one is that Senator Snooks is a jerk, hates jobs, hates you, hates puppies, and you should vote him out of office as quickly as you possibly can. The secondary payload is, this advertisement was brought to you by a group you have never heard of. And by the way, you know it's expensive to buy ad time. So something weird is going on. And that message gets imparted with every single one of those ads, irrespective of who it's targeting. And I think that's going to boil up and boil over. I think that has a lot to do with why people are so dissatisfied with the political process. They feel it's been hijacked, and they don't even know who hijacked it. They're these phony front shops that they can't tell who they are. And they're right. So that's a battle that we are going to fight quite hard between now and the election. We're finalizing some changes to the bill and coming up with a plan for keeping it in the public's view. I also think that Citizens United, that decision has been such a disaster that, particularly with the 4-4 court, and even if we're lucky with a 5-4 court, it's going to be taken down. It can't sustain itself. So many of the factual predicates that it built on have been proven factually wrong. And the behavior that it has elicited is so grotesque. And the biggest gap of all that it left was that it assumed that if you let these big corporations and billionaires spend unlimited amounts of money, they'd get on the air and they'd say, "Hi, I'm Charles Koch, and I don't like Sheldon Whitehouse because he's doing too much stuff that bothers me, and here's why I think you should vote him out." And you know who it was, and you know what the deal was. And that just hasn't happened. So what's happened instead is that our colleagues get approached by people saying, "You better line right up, or I'm going to put a primary against you. I'm going to put $10 million against your behind your primary opponent, and you're all done." You might have seen the Charles Koch ad, you might have seen the spending, you might have known what's going on. You could say, okay, that's part of the Great American Public Debate. But the threat of doing that was never going to be anything but private. That was always going to be a backroom conversation. And overlooking that was the single unforgivable sin of the Citizens United decision in its rush to open those floodgates. And that's a sin that can't be undone because it's a fundamental human truth.
One more question, Senator. You're not tired?
I can't help asking, were you in the Senate chamber when Senator Inhofe brought in the snowball? And if so, what did you say to him?
I was not in the chamber, but I bolted for the chamber when I heard he had done it. And I was the first to reply. And, I do these speeches every week. I put a lot of work into them. If I'm lucky, 15,000 people see them. I went over cold on this one. Thankfully, I had a lot of thinking baked into me by all those speeches, and replied cold for about 5 minutes. I think that thing's over 1 million hits. So I'm sorry to say this in a university, but careful preparation does not always pay off. Sometimes winging it seems to work. So let me say one thing. I see a lot of the signs from the FANG folks here about the plant. I appreciate what you're doing. Everybody in America needs to do what they think is the right thing on the issues that they care about. You think that this is the right way to go about it, I'm for that. I don't quarrel with you at all. Where I stand, from my seat in the United States Senate, I very firmly believe that my time and effort is best spent going after a climate fee, trying to expose the denial apparatus and trying to fix the campaign finance system. I've made some pretty strong enemies already with what I've done. There's only so much that I bring to this table, and I'm going to put all of my powder and all of my effort that I have to spare into those three things. And I'm sorry that I am not where you want me to be with respect to this particular power plant, but it is my considered judgment that I am doing the best I can in the best way that I can, just as you have your considered judgment that you are doing the best you can in the best way that you can. And I thank you for being here, doing what you're doing.